Hi, this is MarqueeCrew, and in advance of Inspire, I wanted to go and show you some defensive configuration techniques, tips, and tricks that might be of use to you. In this, I'll be both using Crew macros, which are available at chaosreignswithin.com, or there are tools that exist within Alteryx Designer itself. The first is ensuring fields are present. When you're reading in data from a source, what if you were expecting a field and that field wasn't present? If it's not present in the data and you want to create it, you can use a crew macro called ensure fields. So in this example, I want to make sure the customer ID field is present and responder value. If I wanted to, I could also create today's date, and any of these fields that I'm creating here get the same field type being present as vString. The customer ID is present in the incoming data. We can take a look at that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to modify this detour to the right. And it's going to now cause this ensure fields data to be populated. So when I go and I run this workflow, on input, this is the way the data looked. I had a responder field. I wanted to see responder value, and I wanted to see a field called today's date. And on output, we see responder value and today's date fields being put into the data. So if I need to make sure that I have these fields there, even if they're not present, ensure fields will put them there for me. Time permitting, I'm going to show you what to do to be able to check to see if the fields are not present. What if you wanted to stop the processing? I haven't actually built that yet, but I'll build it for you. So I'm going to disable this container and take a look at another trick, expecting equal. When I'm expecting equal, I'm using a crew macro, and so I'm first going to make sure that all these detours are turned off. And what I'm actually doing is I'm connecting this one file to itself. So if I'm comparing the customer file before and after, it certainly should be the same. And I'm going to run this, and we see here that there were no messages and everything ran just beautifully. What if I was missing the first three records? Well, I can test for that, put a detour to the right, and that's going to now skip the first three records. And when I run now, I'm going to get error messages. I expected 2,678 rows because that was part of the E input, but the actual number of rows received were 2,675 rows, which you can see that number here as well. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell you the first things that it found that were specifically different. For field address row 1, it expected 376 South Jasmine Street, but it actually got 1599 William Street. It is looking record for record, field by field, and it is showing me that there were thousands of differences in these files. If instead of skipping the data, we got the right number of records to come through, but what I want to do is I want to say if the customer is number 11, I'm going to change their response from being a no to a yes. And in that case, it's now going to show me an error, unexpected value, field responder row 9, expected no, the actual was yes. So it's giving you a view of your data, and it's going to summarize, did you get what you expected? join. Now this one I actually mentioned in a podcast. If you listen to the Alter Everything podcast from Brian, you'll hear me talk about it. One thing that you can do when you're running a join, in this case I'm joining customers and transactions and I'm running them together. In this case, every customer that comes through here is joining up to the transaction data, and I'm not getting any orphans. So it's great. Every customer is being found to have had transactions. I've got a disabled container here where I know that there are transactions that aren't going to match up. Well, I'm going to show you what happens if there is a difference. Expected 0 records, actual there were 25 records. In this case, I could create that same type of condition happening here where we're losing records. Now, the way that these tools work is through use of the macro itself, but I'm going to show you the way to do this with just the tools that are part of Alteryx Designer. And there's a test tool. And with the test tool, if I was to take this left output anchor from the join, I could add a rule that says no unmatched customers. And the connection input to that, you see this number 1 here? It is from connection number 1. If you look here at the anchor, you can see that I can have many connections coming in. And I'm going to say that my test value is 0. And I'm going to run. And there are no error messages. I also want to show you a couple little fun tricks here with this. You could put here unmatched customer records and rename this connection. When I now take a look at the no unmatched customers, the input connection is, instead of being the number 1 input, it's got a name to it. It's a little bit easier to follow. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cause there to be a unmatched record. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the first, say, 10 records that come through this transaction data and cause unmatched records to exist. And now it's saying the test no unmatched customers failed, expected 0. The number of records was 2,668. Wow, that's pretty bad. And I had only selected the first 10 records. I stated verbally I was going to skip the first 10 records, in which case here we've got 10 customer records that are in error. Well, that's great. Now let's do another test here, and I'm going to remove this. I can add that back later. If I'm expecting the number of customer records to come into this record to actually be the output of the join, how could I do that? Well, I can add another input here, which is now named number 1, and let's put the customer join input, and then here I've created, there's a number 1 here. Let me just move this so I can see the line better. And I'm going to name this customer join output. And I can add a new rule, and this is the input to join equals output from join. And my input connection that I'm going to check first is now going to be the join input. And instead of being a specific value, record count matches other inputs record count, and I'm going to make that one the join output. And hit play. And lo and behold, 2600 records and 2600 records match. Now I'm going to do my sample test here again, and I'm going to skip those first 10 records and hit play. Now I'm seeing test, no unmatched customers failed, so I'm getting some records coming through here, but I'm also seeing this test here that the target number is 2668, but the join input was 2678. So there's an error in this data. So instead of me sampling these first 10 records, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a union here, and I'm going to put a select here, and I'm basically going to double my data and hit play. So sometimes your write input to a join is going to have duplicate data in it. And in this case, I'm going to purposely double all my data. So I had 2600 records on input, but this join output is now 5300 records. I'm getting an error because of that. So these test tools are there. They've been hiding in plain sight for you. And if you're looking to go and improve upon the efficiency of your workflows, you may want to do something like this. The last thing for me to show you, I mentioned that I would do that for you, and I don't want to renege on my word. I've got this customer data here, and I'm just going to go and copy that and paste it over here. So I've now got the customer data again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a field information tool and apply that tool to both my expected data and my actual data. So we could pretend that customer data was the way that we've seen this data month over month. And I can go and take, and I'll just run this very quickly, the field information tool. I'm going to just clean this up so I don't get these error messages. Is basically looking at the output of, say, a select. And I can come on here and I can remove some of the fields that aren't useful to me if they're not. I'm going to compare the name and the type. The size, scale, source, and description I might want to just ignore. You could look at every field. And I've got the same file again, and I use a technique of transposing the data into name and value pairs. And so now I've got this customer data coming through the file. And actually, I don't actually need to do that here. I take that back, everybody. Mark made a mistake. I've got this data coming through here, and I've got name, type, size, source, etc. on input, and I've got name and type. And here I've got the same name and type. And now I can just do a join here, and I can go and I can look at name and type and imagine putting another test tool here. And I'll change number 1 to L and number 2 to R, and create a rule, add all fields are present, and L doesn't have any mismatches, and add all fields present, all fields, let's make that match here and just check R is 0. I would do something slightly different than that, but for the purpose of our test, I think this is good. I can run that and things look terrific. Now here I've got this customer data coming in here, and so let's pretend I didn't get the store number. Uh-oh, I fail. Or let's pretend that the store number is present, but it's actually a number. So I'll change that to an integer. And now it's not matching because the types and values of the data are not matching. So there are a lot of tricks that you could play, a lot of defensive configuration that you could put into your workflow that ultimately save you should the incoming data change, should a join lose, drop, or multiply records. Defensive configuration could be your friend and could save you in the long run. Have a great day.